What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Courtside podcast here on the Basketball Network. I'm Caleb. I'm joined by my good friend and co-host Connor. Connor, college basketball is back. We've got our first full week down. How's it going?
Going great, I know you just got done watching Warriors Thunder. I was watching bits and pieces. Exciting game there, first half. But we're not here to talk about the NBA today, man. We're here to talk about the first week of college basketball. Dude, we had an exciting first week. Obviously, I think there's a lot of expected results, but, we had some pretty unexpected results, I would say, this week. I'm excited for this episode. There's a lot of interesting storylines throughout that first week.
Yeah, just like the NBA had a lot of surprises in college basketball as well, and I'm excited to get talking about them. But before we do that, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, 5-star rating and a comment is greatly appreciated. But we'll go ahead and jump into our transition three, the three biggest stories in the world of college basketball. And Connor, I'll kick it over to you.
Yes. All right, for this first one, I know I was huge on this dude coming into the season, and he was one of the reasons why I picked them, I think, to win their conference to start with. But the big man from Creighton had himself a day, man. Ryan Cockburner dropped 49 points, 20 of 22 from the field, 2 of 2 from three-point, 11 rebounds, and 3 blocks. Crazy stat line. Honestly, it's not even the fact I think he scored 49 points. It's the fact where you just watched a center in college drop 49 points, which is it's obviously we see some guards, catch fire, from three ball and score 40 plus points. But I feel like we rarely see a big man score 40 plus points. So Caleb, what are your thoughts on his outstanding performance?
Yeah, I agree on the center take, and I think this is just another reason why NIL has been so important to college basketball. One, because the NBA doesn't value these type of players anymore, right? They're not looking for those big centers that kind of do the fundamental stuff. They're looking for the upside and the different players like that. And with NIL, these players are able to stay for, instead of 1 or 2 years, they're staying for 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. And with COVID, we've seen guys in 6th or 7th years. And that's the case with Kalkbrenner back for his 5th year. I mean, this is an absolutely insane stat line. The last player to have 20 plus field goals and shoot 90% from the field in a game was Bill Walton back in the 1973 National Final for UCLA. I mean, he set plenty of records for Creighton in this one. It was just an absolutely amazing game. I'm definitely going to think he's going to have a dominant season for Creighton this year. And then for our next story, we have Columbia upsetting Villanova. Now, if you know who Villanova is, they were one of the powerhouses for the past 10 to 15 seasons when they had Jay Wright as their head coach, but obviously Jay Wright is there no more. The mantle has now been passed to Kyle Neptune, and Connor, I'd say he's on the hot seat. Villanova is 1-1 after losing 90-80 to Columbia at home. A big notice about this one is that Villanova under Kyle Neptune is just 18-7 against sub 100 KenPom teams. So basically these teams that are kind of bottom of the barrel in college basketball. When Jay Wright was the coach for the Villanova Wildcats, they only lost 2 such games in his final 9 years and have won 22 straight before he retired. Connor, what's your thoughts? Do we think Kyle Neptune's on the hot seat this year for Villanova, or how long do we think he's going to last?
I mean, I think it's just a weird situation. So for those who don't know, Villanova actually currently does not have an athletic director to fire Kyle Neptune. Their AD left for Northwestern, and they still have not filled his shoes. But I mean, if you're looking at it from probably just the organization and the fans, like you have to think he's on the hot seat, right? Because once again, it's different if you're losing to like good teams, right? But I think, like you said, they've lost to some bad teams. Haven't done anything in the tournament since Jay Wright left.
Haven't made the tournament yet, at all.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And which is, a bad look for a team that won 2 national championships, in the past 10 years. But it's also just like, I don't know. It's just a weird situation. But you have to think when they do find an athletic director, he's probably on pretty thin ice.
Yeah, I think they have to make the tournament for sure for him not to get fired this season, and he might have to win a game or two there because they have really underperformed, especially with the roster that Jay Wright had left him. These past couple of seasons have just been a train wreck for Villanova.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of going into playing off that point they had about a train wreck. Another team that kind of so I'm going to be talking about Purdue here. Their 7'4" freshman center Daniel Jacobson is out for the year. He was playing pretty well in that season opener, right? 13.7 rebounds, 3 blocks. Replacing Zach Edey. He's out for the year with a broken tibia. That's a huge loss, and it's especially when I don't know. I feel like at times their guards still did not play as well as we were expecting to. So he's kind of leaving a big hole here, Caleb.
He is, and he played so well in that first game. As you mentioned, kind of put up a lot of good stats and played some big minutes as well. But he went down really early in that second game for Purdue. And this is going to be such a big loss because we know after watching the past couple of seasons with Zach Edey at Purdue, I mean, Purdue knows how to play around a big man like that. And honestly, he was starting for the team, which I wasn't expecting, but was playing big minutes and was going to be a big role for the Purdue Boilermakers this season. I just don't know where we're going from here. They got a lot of, seniority, a lot of people that are veterans in the program as well, but just a big blow for this team. And hopefully they're going to be able to replace him. We're going to see bigger minutes for Trey Kaufman-Wren, obviously moving him over from the power forward to the center, I would assume. But obviously a big blow when you have an injury to your starter this early in the season. All right. Well, moving on, one of the teams that everybody has been waiting to see and to see the star freshman's debut, that is the Duke Blue Devils and none other than Cooper Flagg. So Duke has started off the year 2-0, beating both Army and Maine at home, and they have looked pretty good, I would say, but for the competition, maybe not exactly what we were expecting from the likes of Cooper Flagg. He's had some crazy highlight plays. But one thing to mention about Cooper Flagg, he's actually been struggling with cramping issues. So he hasn't been playing as many minutes as most people would expect. I mean, still around 27 and a half minutes, but both games he's been limited a little bit in the second half due to cramping. But obviously that's not stopping him from balling out. Right now he's averaging 15 and a half points, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, and about 2 blocks. So doing just about everything. And that's something that we mentioned early on, Connor, was he's going to be a guy that he might not lead the team in scoring, but he's going to be up there in every single statistical category. And we've already seen that play out for two games so far.
Yeah, no, I think obviously I think he's had some really good moments, especially that dunk he had at the end of the first half. And that first game was insane. But I think it does go back to the level of competition Duke played this week. Not very good teams. And which, I don't know, obviously, first couple of games of the season, I know teams are still getting into their rhythm, but Cooper Flagg's kind of had some shooting problems. He's only shooting 44% from the field overall. He's 11 of 25. He's also only 2 of 8 from 3, which I know is a pretty small sample size. But 25%, if that holds the rest of the season, historically when Duke star player is not shooting threes well, they don't typically do as well. But once again, first 2 games of the season, I'm sure he can get his stroke back, especially like you said, I think if he's been struggling with cramps, hopefully, he can figure out whatever he's been dealing with so he can, actually get to play more than 27 minutes a game, because I feel like when you have a player like Cooper Flagg, he has to be playing at least 30 minutes a game, especially when it gets into these close games like the ACC is known to have. But outside of Flagg, though, I will say Duke has looked pretty well. I'm going to highlight one player. I know you were pretty excited about him when we talked about our preseason, and it's going to be Con Knuppel. He shot the ball extremely well. He's shooting 50% from 3. He's actually leading the Blue Devils with 18 points per game right now. Dude, he has come out the gate swinging.
Yeah, he is a sharpshooter, and not only that, he has shown off his athleticism, especially in their first game against Maine. Just absolutely posterized a guy, like had the highlight dunk when you would expect that to be Cooper Flag. So he has been a big bright spot to the Duke Blue Devils, and I would say honestly playing his way into maybe being, or at least being projected as a lottery pick in this upcoming NBA draft. So when everyone thinks Duke Blue Devils, obviously the initial thought is Cooper Flag because he's kind of the one that everybody's been talking about. I mean, we've been talking about him a lot, but Concanipple is someone that you should not be sleeping on. He has been making a name for himself and has been playing really well. Their other star freshman, Kaman Maluch, has been balling out as well. I mean, he is basically a walking double-double, it seems, just kind of all over the place. Currently averaging around 9 points, 10 rebounds, and about a block and a half a game. So he's been playing great defense as well. And I think this team has really just showed off their depth so far this year, right? I mean, you also have the likes of Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor in the starting lineup, and then other guys such as like Sion James, Mason Gillis that have been playing well as well. So the Duke Blue Devils have gotten off to a really good start so far, although they haven't been tested that much, but that's definitely going to change this week when they go up against Kentucky, which we'll be talking about a little later in today's episode.
Yeah. And just one quick comment on Kaman Maluch. If he was on any other team, he would be averaging a double-double, but obviously on this loaded Duke team, they don't really rely on him, as a scoring threat, really. But, I think it's just to note that you have this highly touted 5-star, and, he's like the fourth, fifth option on this team on the starting five.
Yep.
So
he's only having to play 20 minutes, right? Like both of these games have been blowouts. So, I mean, looking at these stats right now, they look good. But imagine whenever they're going to be playing a lot closer of a game, especially what we expect on Tuesday night this week. I mean, these guys are going to get a lot more minutes. And I think everything's just going to look even better, to be honest.
Yeah. I also think Maluch is a great kind of Duke big man, as we've kind of been accustomed to seeing, especially with I don't know. I feel like Duke is pretty known for their defense. I think John Shire has done an excellent job in this program. Hopefully, he can do something with these freshmen. But moving on to our second point, a couple programs here that kind of inherited nothing, which we're familiar with both, or one program as a historic program, but we're kind of begging a question here is who has looked better so far, Kentucky or Arkansas? So obviously Calipari left Kentucky for Arkansas, had one player on his roster, and then Mark Pope took over the vacancy at Kentucky, which I think, did he even have a player on his roster when he took over that program?
I think both teams were pretty much gutted.
Yeah.
I believe there's only one returner on Arkansas, but on Kentucky, that might be a completely new team. So basically new teams altogether.
Yeah, so two pretty new teams here. So, I know it's just a first week, but I mean, I kind of want to hear your first impressions on them, Caleb.
Yeah. First impressions so far, both teams have looked really good. I think we've had two completely different starts to the season, though, in terms of scheduling. So Mark Pope in Kentucky took the approach of, I feel like, let's schedule a little bit some easier games, get our feet under us, make sure that everybody on the team, kind of gain some chemistry as we walk in and get two pretty easy wins. So they beat both Wright State and Buckner by over 25 points in each of those games. One thing to note is both of these teams are sub 180 KenPom teams. So they are not the best. So not great competition for Kentucky at all. But obviously it's always good to have your team, going in and playing well and getting used to each other. Kentucky has really shown their depth in these two games. I believe right now they have about 7 players averaging double figures, and they have, I think, 11 players playing double-digit minutes. I would assume this shrinks as they get into, tougher games, as the one we mentioned earlier, being Duke on Tuesday night. But they have looked great. They play very up-tempo, have pretty good shooting as well. So Kentucky looks to be playing really well so far under Mark Pope. And then you have Arkansas and Coach Cal, who scheduled a pretty easy game first off when they played Lipscomb and beat them 75-50 on opening night. But then they went out to Dallas, Texas, and played the Baylor Bears on Saturday night, and it was an absolute battle. Arkansas was behind for most of the game, but they were never out of it, and it was really close. But they ended up losing to the number 8 team in the nation, 67-72. But one thing I'll say is, I mean, are playing 6 transfers and 3 freshmen right now, and to be in a game against a Baylor team that has a lot of veteran presence on their own side, I was very impressed with Arkansas. I think they can do a lot of damage. So, in my humble opinion, I'm actually going to give the edge to Arkansas, even though they are 1-1, just for Coach Cal being willing to schedule such a tough game this early in the season. And to be honest, come next week, I think both Kentucky and Arkansas are going to have the best record, or the same exact record.
Yeah, I mean, I know Baylor did not start their season out too well, but I mean, they're a good team. I think Arkansas definitely was fighting an uphill battle when they scheduled them. But I mean, I think, like you said, they're playing 9 new players, to the program. I know like one of them has played with Calipari before. Don't think the rest of them have. They're still. I mean, I'm going to say both of these teams are still learning to play together, play in the system that both of these excellent coaches are trying to run. But I don't know. I think obviously Kentucky's about to get tested, and I think we'll kind of be able to see which one, maybe who's not necessarily better, but we'll be able to gauge Kentucky a lot more, hopefully on Tuesday night. I believe that's when they play Duke. That one, I'm kind of excited for that game. Obviously, I think it's a real test for Kentucky and Duke. But if Kentucky comes out on top, I think there's a conversation to be had, on is Kentucky maybe the best team in the SEC now? Because I mean that Duke team's really good. I feel like there might be one other SEC team currently that has really played a tough game so far, outside of Arkansas. So I don't know. I think this week will probably tell a lot about these 2 teams.
It will for sure. One thing to note is KenPom actually has Kentucky ranked number 30 right now and Arkansas ranked number 35. So to his rankings right now, he has Kentucky as being better than Arkansas. But I just feel from Coach Cal and the willingness that he has to schedule such a tough opponent like Baylor early on in the season, I got to give him credit, and they fought hard. Also, they, to me, have more talent than Kentucky. I feel like Kentucky definitely has more like senior type players on their roster. But when you look at Arkansas's talent, I mean, they have guys that can go off and play really well. One guy I want to highlight is Boogie Fland. I mean, he has been playing a ton of minutes, but has been balling out so far. So currently averaging 17 points, 4 rebounds, and 5 assists, but he's been averaging 37.5 minutes through the first 2 games. So he's been playing great. But Connor, I had a quick question to you on Arkansas. One guy we had mentioned that they got through the transfer portal was Jonas Adu, and he's actually not seeing the floor that much. He's only averaging 8.5 minutes. Does that surprise you at all? Because I'm pretty surprised. I honestly thought that he might be starting for the Razorbacks this season.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely surprising to me. I don't really know, maybe just not fitting in well with the system currently. Yeah, no, I also thought that was kind of weird. But, it's also like, do I not play him, because he's not playing well? But then it's also like, is he ever going to get out of his slump if he doesn't get playing time? Because this is a player who contributed on a very good Tennessee team, Obviously, he's been playing in the SEC, which has been a really tough basketball conference the past few years. So we know he can play well. But, sometimes just players don't fit with a system or with this program that they go to. So maybe it's something like that, or maybe he's dealing with something completely different that we're just not aware of.
Yeah, they have been looking to play Zvonimir Avicic a lot more, which is actually one of the guys that followed Coach Cal from Kentucky to Arkansas. And I mean, he's been playing well. He's a 7'2" sophomore that can stretch the floor a little bit as well. Currently shooting 50% from three on the season. I know it's only through 2 games, but when you have a 7'2" guy that can stretch the floor and shoot like that, I understand a little bit why Adu wouldn't be playing as much, but 8.5 minutes just really surprised me. I'm expecting him to get more minutes as they play maybe some of these more veteran teams, just because he has been a guy, as you mentioned, that's contributed so much in college so far. But that just really stuck out to me when I saw that on the Arkansas side. But for me personally, I think I just really am excited to see the Arkansas Kentucky matchup that's going to happen later in the season. I mean, these two
For
teams
sure.
are completely new rosters, and we're going to see Coach Cal going back to Lexington to face his old team. I
I was
think
gonna
that's
say
going to
that's
be a
gonna
very
be
funny
a
atmosphere.
yeah, it's gonna be an interesting atmosphere. I wonder how the student section is gonna feel about having him back there.
You know, I feel like they're going to boo, but at the end of the day, I mean, he did bring Kentucky a national title. Probably should have brought them a few more, but hey, at least he got them one, right?
Hey, you know what? Honestly, I think that's all you can hope for. There's a lot of programs out there who have never won a title, so
Very true. And we're actually going to talk about one of those right here, right now. And the question that we have that we're going to be discussing is the top of the Big 12 overrated? Because it seemed like from early on this season and opening week, there were some very big surprises. And the first surprise came late at night on opening night of college basketball. And that was the number 8 Baylor Bears going out to Washington and getting absolutely blown out by the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Like, wasn't even a game. Really was only a game maybe for the first 5 to 10 minutes, and then Gonzaga just got out and ran and never stopped. So Gonzaga ended up winning 101-63, outscored them by 19 points in both the first and the second half, which is an absolute clinic by the Gonzaga Bulldogs. But we'll give my shout out to Baylor because, as we mentioned earlier, they weren't scared to schedule another tough game. Went out and played number 16 Arkansas on Saturday night and ended up getting the win 72-67. So, Connor, wanted to hear what your initial thoughts were on the Baylor Bears, and were they a little overrated coming into the season? Because it seems they might have been.
I mean, overrated maybe a little, but like I talked about this in our preseason. I think Baylor, is a team. They live and they die by the three to the T. And if you watch that game against Gonzaga, they could not buy a shot to save their lives. They shot horrible from outside. So when your
Three
whole
for 21 from three.
exactly, and when your whole game plan is reliant on you making threes and you're missing threes, you're not going to win that game. Obviously, I don't think we were expecting that bad of a beatdown. I was expecting it to at least be a little closer than what the final score was. But obviously, I mean, I think they rebounded really well. Scott Drew, got his team to refocus. They took down the number 16 team. So, man, I don't know. It's like they look good one game or they look bad the first game, and then the second game they looked really good. I think something that's a little interesting is what do you think of their play from their star freshman, Edgecombe?
Edgecombe, you can see if you watch the games, you can see the intangibles, right? The athleticism is there, the high flying, acrobatic playing. I mean, if you're watching the Baylor Arkansas game, he had the most amazing block I think I've ever seen. They called it a foul for some reason, but his head was above the rim on the block, which was absolutely crazy. But he has struggled shooting the ball heavily this season. In the
Mhm.
first game, he was 2 for 11 from the field and 0 for 3 from three. And then in the second game, he shot 14% from the three and 25% from the field. So the shooting has been very inconsistent, to say the least. Honestly, hasn't been there yet. But when he was in high school, that was something he was known for, was he was able to shoot the ball a little bit. So I think I just got to give him a little more time, because you can definitely see the bright spots for VJ Edgecombe. Now it's just a matter of fact of actually putting the ball in the hole. So yes, it's been pretty surprising for me, but you can definitely see where the highly rated parts of his games are, and I think it's going to come together.
Yeah, I will say though, it is always a little concerning when someone who is showcased to be able to shoot a little bit, it does not translate to the next stage. That is always a little bit concerning to me. But I think, like we've been saying, the first week, I think you have to give it a little bit more time before we can make a judgment or not. But he's getting playing time, which I think is important. So hopefully he can get into a groove, he can get more comfortable. And have more of an impact on a game on the offensive end.
I agree. And their next 4 games are against unranked opponents, not really good ones at all. Sam Houston State, Tarleton, St. John's, which will be a decent one, but just a few that aren't to the caliber that they had with Gonzaga and Arkansas. I think we're going to be able to tell a lot more about him after we see a couple of those games and before they go over to UConn to play them in early December, which will be a fun game as well. But for me, I think Baylor might have been a little overrated in the season, but for the most part, in terms of their early season so far, I'm just going to chalk it up to the fact that this team hasn't really been playing together all that much. They lost a lot from last year's team. And so these guys, they're just trying to put the pieces together. And that's what the season before the conference is for. So I'm expecting them to get a lot better. But we did have a pretty big upset, in my opinion, for one of the top teams in the Big 12 later on, and that was on Saturday night as well. We had the number 4 Houston Cougars get upset by the number 11 Auburn Tigers. And for me personally, watching this game, I think there was a big thing that was highlighted for the Houston Cougars, and that was their depth in the backcourt. I feel like they have 3 really good guards, and then that's it.
Yep.
It's a struggle once one of them has to go off the court and maybe like get some foul trouble, which we saw with Uzon in that game, because they're not bringing in a whole lot from the bench this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it was pretty evident they have a lot to figure out. Obviously, we know, I think, like you said, what those top 3 dudes can do. But, basketball is a lot more than just 3 players. But I will say, to their credit, Auburn, I think, played also extremely well, which was a little bit surprising considering what happened the day before. With their plane incident, they had a couple players get into an altercation mid-flight, and they had to actually turn around and land the plane, and those 2 players did not come with them to this game, which don't want to get too much into that because there's not a whole lot of details, but I think it's important to note this did happen. And everyone's like, oh, well, this is a big distraction. They're not going to be playing well because of what just happened. And then they just come out and they just absolutely upset Houston. So, I mean, shout out to Bruce Pearl. He got his team ready. Even with everything that happened on, traveling there, his team looked pretty good, which I think they were projected second in the SEC. And me and you were both like, oh, I'm not so sure about them. They're looking like it right now.
Yeah, they were a big surprise for me. Obviously, we knew what we were going to get from their star player, Janai Broome, the preseason All-American. And he did just that, had 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 blocks in the game against Houston. But I think we would be doing this guy a disservice if we did not mention him. And that is the freshman Tahad Pettiford from Auburn. He just went absolutely nuclear, especially in the second half, dropping 21 points. He was 5 for 8 from the 3-point line. And it just seemed like when they needed a big bucket, they were going to the 6'1 freshman. And that was not what I was expecting out of this Auburn Tigers team. I mean, you have guys on the other side like LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp, who are sharpshooters in their own right. But it looked like Tahad Pettiford was the best guard on the floor last night. And he only did it in 24 minutes, which was very impressive. And I felt like it was a big reason why Houston was able to get this, or Auburn was able to get this win.
Yeah, I know. I think I was just as surprised as you were. He definitely outplayed the Houston guards. But, kind of. I feel like sometimes that's just kind of how college basketball goes. Sometimes your freshman just ends up dropping 24 points on a top 4 team in the league. Um, but I don't know. I don't think Houston is overrated. I think Auburn might have been a little underrated based off of this. Because I think, like we said, Houston does have those 3 really good backcourt players. I think they're a good team. I think they have a little bit. Their rotations need to be, they need to figure out who can actually contribute for them. But yeah, so I'm not going to say Houston's overrated, just because I don't know. I think Auburn is probably a little better than people are thinking.
I agree, and Kim Pom has them right up there. So actually, this was a matchup between the number 1 and number 2 Kim Pom team. Houston was 1 and Auburn was 2. And right after the game, they basically just flipped. So now you can see Auburn is the number 1 team in the nation in Kim Pom, and right behind them is the number 2 Houston Cougars. So I agree. Don't necessarily think they're overrated, but I think Kelvin Sampson definitely has some things to get figured out before they move on, especially going into Big 12 play. But we had another huge matchup in the Big 12 this week. I just love how the Big 12 and some of these coaches are scheduling so far this season and honestly in seasons to come. But we had the Kansas Jayhawks taking on the North Carolina Tar Heels in Allen Fieldhouse in the first part of a head-to-head. They'll be going over to Chapel Hill next season to play them. And Kansas took down UNC, but it was definitely a nail biter as they won 92-89. It looked like they had this game in hand, Connor, at the end of the first half, being up 15 points, 53-38. But North Carolina had a huge second half, scoring 51 points, but they just came up just short against the Tar Heels. I think this was a really big win for Kansas, but honestly, it made me have a few question marks because when you have a team that has that many veterans on it and you have that big of a halftime lead, I was expecting them to kind of keep the Tar Heels at bay the entire game, but that was not the way that it happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, they were up 53-38, at the start of the second half. And I don't know. I mean, I think I'm right there with you. When you have guys like DeJuan Harris and Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams, like they should know how to keep a lead.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I think it was pretty cool to see Zeke Mayo go off for 21 points. I know we talked a lot about him leading up to the season, so it was kind of cool to see the transfer contribute to Kansas. But I'm going to give a shout out to UNC, man. Seth Trimble played really well. I will say RJ Davis did leave a little bit to be desired there. It's kind of funny because he had 16 points and 4 assists was his stat line, which, I feel like typically that's a pretty good game for a college player. But when you're talking about someone who can be in the running for player of the year, you expect in these big games, especially one where the final score is 92-89, to contribute just a little bit more than he did.
Yeah, I mean, he went 3 for 15 from the field. If he only hits, if he goes 6 for 15, the Tar Heels win this game.
Yeah.
So it was definitely a part to that left a lot to be desired. But I agree what you had mentioned about Zeke Mayo. So fun fact about him is he actually grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, went to a high school that was less than a mile away from Allen Fieldhouse. And then to have this type of game in Allen Fieldhouse against North Carolina was really cool to see. But one thing I'm really surprised about for the Kansas Jayhawks is AJ Storr. I had mentioned him as thinking he was going to be the transfer player of the year in the Big 12 this year. And this guy is not even starting. I mean, he played a lot more minutes, playing 27 minutes this game. But I am very confused why Bill Self has him coming off the bench and why he is not getting as many minutes as some of these other guys, to be honest. Have you had any thoughts on that? Because it is caught me by surprise completely.
I mean, to be fair, he did play 28 minutes against UNC, which was the fifth highest out of everyone. I don't know if it's not necessarily surprising. I mean, at times Bill Self hasn't played freshmen as much. Obviously, I think when he gets like top 5 freshmen and whatnot, he has played them a lot. I think we saw when Andrew Wiggins was there, when Grady Dick was there, they obviously played pretty much the whole game. But I think they have a lot of veterans, but not just veterans, but ones who are really good on this team. And when you're playing these big schools, I think you tend to rely on those players just a little bit more than your freshmen.
Yep, I do agree with that. And there was a Big 12 team that definitely did not underperform, and they might have been a little underrated, and that was the UCF Knights going out and beating then at that time the number 13 Texas A&M Aggies 64-61 in their first game of the season. This was a huge surprise to me because A&M was one of the teams in the SEC I was expecting to have a really good year. But it was something that we had talked about, right? Wade Taylor the fourth, they kind of live and die by him, and he did not have a good game. 4 of 15 from the field on his side, and the UCF Knights definitely took advantage of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to add here because I think you hit it. This team goes as Wade Taylor the fourth goes. He shot very bad. And honestly, the team as a whole really didn't shoot that well. And so obviously the scoring was lacking. I think traditionally, you would look at this game and be like, oh, that's a pretty normal scoring game. But I think over the past few years, and especially if you watch Texas A&M, this is a pretty low scoring game. I mean, this team needs someone else to step up. I think we talked about it. They lost a decent amount in this past off season, seniors, transfers, and whatnot. But it just kind of like there's just no one else on this team who can take over when Wade Taylor is having a struggle shooting like this. Because last year they had Tyrese Radford who could take over when Wade Taylor was struggling. Right now they don't have a player like that.
I agree, but shout out to UCF for getting that win. That's such a huge win to start off the season and to start your season off, especially going into the gauntlet that is the Big 12. UCF might be a team that we need to keep an eye on because if they can, beat Texas A&M, I mean, who knows? They might be able to make some noise in the Big 12. But the last team I wanted to talk about, Connor, and this is one I'm really excited about. They're really good at football right now, but they're maybe just as good. We'll see. But at basketball, and that's BYU. The new coach, Kevin Young, former Phoenix Suns assistant, has got this team going. Now, they've only played 2 games and haven't really played anybody too big, beating Central Arkansas and UC Riverside. But they got this freshman called Igor Dimon. I don't know if you've seen much tape, but he's a 6'9" point guard, averaging 19 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 9 assists, shooting 62.5% from the field right now. I mean, this is an NBA general manager's dream of a prospect, in my opinion. I mean, 6'9", he's so smooth in the game, has great vision as well. He has been really fun to watch and someone that I think can maybe take BYU to a level that we weren't seeing or expecting coming into this year.
Yeah. I have been able to watch, a decent amount of his highlights. Okay. I am not saying he is going to be as good or he is as good, but the way he moves and the way he takes his shots, like the shots he takes, reminds me of Kevin Durant. But once again, I think Kevin Durant is obviously an all-time generational player. But just the way he moves reminds me of him, which that's actually what I'm going to highlight is I feel like it's becoming more common to see these taller point guards, but I feel like typically they don't move like he does. I know me and you both went to Oklahoma State. We watched Cade Cunningham in person. And Cade is a phenomenal player. He's one of the best players I saw at the college level. Cade didn't move like he did. And Cade's 6'8". This dude just moves so fluidly. And which I think that contributes to his 9 assists a game, because he can just, he gets around offenders. He gets in the middle of the paint without, any effort at all.
Yes, and his usage is off the charts. I mean, when he is on the floor, the ball is in his hands. He had a pretty crazy dunk in one of these games, and I agree totally. Just very fluid, very smooth. It's someone that I think we're going to be talking about at the next level for sure. So when I saw him at the first, I kind of thought he didn't play exactly like him, but just from the size and the usage and able to get his teammates involved, I saw a little LaMelo Ball just
Mm.
because playing from the point guard role. But I feel like it's a more of a mix from LaMelo and Kevin Durant, to be honest, because I feel like he's not as flashy as LaMelo, definitely a lot more smooth like Kevin Durant.
I don't know. I was thinking he kind of had some LaMelo flashiness in him because wasn't he the one who threw the off the backboard oop this
He
week?
he did make a pass off the backboard, which is not something that we see all too much, and I feel like if we're seeing it in the
uh,
league, it's definitely a LaMelo Ball highlight.
yeah, for sure. But one quick note before we move on to our last part here. I was actually expecting a decent amount from this BYU team. They had a good run last year, into the tournament. Um, Obviously, their head coach left, but uh, they were actually receiving votes for the preseason top 25 this year. I know we talked about them just very briefly, but something I think is important to note is the amount of money that's being poured into BYU athletics, which we don't have to talk about why that is, but I think the important note is there's a lot of money being poured into BYU athletics. I think they're a team to watch just across the board, across all sports over the next few seasons.
I agree. And last point I'll make is Kevin Young being a former NBA assistant. I mean, he's going to have this team playing a different style of basketball than most college basketball teams. I think it's going to be work really well for them. And you can already see it now. So, as you mentioned, they're pouring a lot of money into the program, and we can see a little bit of that now. But they might be in the running for AJ DeBansa this upcoming year. I've heard some pretty crazy numbers getting thrown out around him in NIL packages. So we'll have to wait and see. But I agree. But BYU is here to stay, not just in basketball, but in all sports and the effort that they're putting behind it.
Yeah, I think NIL obviously has a lot of problems, changed the landscape of college basketball. But one thing I have liked about it, I think it's even the playing field a lot for a lot of colleges. I think we've been seeing that in football this year. And I think it's obviously starting to trickle down into the other sports as well. But onto our final segment of the show, which is going to be our top games of the week. We'll be picking kind of our favorites from a week, and we'll be picking our winners. So this week we got the Champions Classic going on Tuesday. So just kind of a couple of games from here that we're going to be talking about. We got Michigan State at Kansas. Caleb, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I'm going to keep this one pretty short. I am not that high on Michigan State this year. I mean, they're 2-0, and you got Coach Izzo, but I just don't think they got the ponies to stay with Kansas Jayhawks. I think Kansas Jayhawks are going to move to 3-0, especially coming off a hot win from UNC. I think Bill Self's going to have this team ready to go. So give me Kansas. I like Michigan State, but just not enough to pick them over the Jayhawks.
Yeah, I do like Michigan State. I don't know. I feel like they're just always a consistently underrated team. It kind of seems like anytime they have hype, they don't meet those expectations. But for some reason, whenever they're not as hyped, they typically play well, and they a lot of times play well in these big games like this one against Kansas. But I think I'm right there with you. Kansas has so much firepower. I think we saw it against UNC the other night, even though they blew a huge lead. Yeah, I like Kansas in this game as well. And then also on Tuesday, we alluded to this earlier in the show, but we have the Blue Devils of Duke playing the Kentucky Wildcats. Caleb, I think I know where you're going at this, but I'll let you take it first.
Hey, I told you early on I'm a Cooper Flag believer, and as long as they can get those cramps checked out and in place and good to go, I got to take the Blue Devils in this one as well. I think this is just a very tall task to give Mark Pope in his third game as his in his career as the coach of the Kentucky Wildcats. Although I do think this is going to be a close one. The spread currently is Duke is favored by 6.5, and I can honestly see Duke winning a game by 3 or 4 points. But I just think Duke Blue Devils, the talent that they have, I think it's going to go a little further than all the new pieces that Mark Pope has in that Kentucky program this year.
Man, I hate it when we agree on every single thing, but obviously I'm picking Duke, but not for Cooper Flagg, though. I'm actually picking it for their other players like Con Knuppel, the big man down low, setting the tone on the defensive end. I'm also just their consistency with their wings right now, and Caleb Foster and Tyrese Proctor, who we didn't talk about. They're obviously not playing 20 points a game, but they've been consistent. They've been good. They've been what Duke has needed them to be, which I think is important, especially when you're playing a team like Kentucky. So that's why I like Duke. But obviously Cooper Flagg, is going to be a big part of that. But I think everyone else around him is what puts them over the top. All right. And then on Friday, which I think this is one of the most exciting ones just because of recent history with them. We have Alabama at Purdue in a rematch of the Final Four game, which, as we know, Purdue took down Alabama. Caleb, Mark Sears and the Crimson Tide against the Boilermakers. Who are you taking?
I am taking not the same result that we got from the Final Four last year. This time, I think Alabama's going to get the Boilermakers, and they're going to win. And it's in Purdue. So this is going to be a really tough game. But, man, can that Crimson Tide score, and they score the ball well. I mean, scoring 110 points in their first game and 88 in their second game. I just don't know if Purdue has the amount of scoring that can keep up with Alabama this season. So I think I got to take Bama in this one.
I'm right there with you, and I think we agree on the reason why this time. I think Alabama's scoring sets them apart, especially with Purdue's big man Jacobson going down for the season. I think he obviously eliminates a huge advantage for Purdue. And I just don't think Purdue guards are going to be able to keep up with Alabama's guards. Unless they just each have career games, I can see Alabama outscoring them pretty quickly. And honestly, I can see this game getting out of hand if Purdue, is really struggling.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
Yeah. All right. So next one, a team that actually had an upset last week, Ohio State, is playing a team that got upset. Ohio State is playing Texas A&M on Friday. I'm expecting Texas A&M to, when the polls come out, he'll be in that 20 to 25 range or unranked altogether. And honestly, we might see Ohio State in the top 25. I think this is a really interesting matchup. I think Ohio State was a little underrated coming in. So, Caleb, what are your thoughts?
They beat Texas last week, and we predicted that one. I think we both had Ohio State in that game, and they beat Texas, so I think they got to beat Texas A&M as well. This time in College Station. I just like what Jake Diebler has going at Ohio State. If you don't remember last year, Chris Holtmann was the head coach at Ohio State. He was a great head coach, but it was not going in the right direction. So they fired him and hired Jake Diebler on as the interim head coach. And it just seems like this team had a switch that was flipped as soon as that happened. And it seems like they're on the same track this year. I like Ohio State in this matchup, although I'm still high on A&M. I just feel like the Buckeyes got something special going on currently in Ohio State. And I think they're going to bring it down to College Station and beat the Aggies.
All right. Well, I'm glad we disagreed here. Give it a little bit of interesting. I'm going Texas A&M. You might call it my bias because my entire family has gone there pretty much. So grew up going to Texas A&M games. But, I think Wade Taylor finally, starts shooting well. I think he catches fire. And so I'm taking Texas A&M in College Station. Not sure if you've ever been to Reed Arena before, dude, but they get crazy loud in there. All right, our next game. This is honestly another top team I feel like we haven't talked about a whole lot, but a very good team at that. We got Arizona at Wisconsin. Wisconsin not been too hot the past few seasons, so interesting game here. I think I might know where you're leaning, but Caleb, what do you think?
Wisconsin's one of the few teams that's actually already won 3 games. They're 3-0 right now, or Arizona being 2-0, and it's in excuse me, it's in Wisconsin, but I got to stick with the Big 12 and go Arizona. I think Caleb Love, and more specifically Tommy Lloyd, I just love his coaching style. He's going to have this team ready to go. They are going to be up in Wisconsin. I think they're going to beat the Badgers pretty heavily, to be honest. I expect this to be maybe a double-digit win by the Arizona Wildcats, and hoping that they can keep the Big 12 on top over the Big 10.
Yeah, I'm going Arizona as well, but mine's a little less analytical, or maybe it's more analytical. I don't know. Mine is just, I feel like Arizona is one of the best regular season teams we see every year. Obviously, it does not translate to the tournament, but every regular season, they are consistently one of the top teams, and they play so well during the regular season. So I'm sticking with Arizona.
That is a very good point. I like that you mentioned it. Just quick stats. So past 3 seasons under Tommy Lloyd, Arizona Wildcats are 33-4, 28-7, 27-9. So I definitely like that take. Yeah, I'm right there with you on Arizona. No, I had already picked them, but I like your reasoning better than mine.
Yeah, no. I don't know. I feel like even before Tommy Lloyd, it was pretty similar. They would play super well, and then they fall apart in the tournament every year.
I agree. Well, I think that is a wrap. Thank you, everyone, for listening and for watching. If you're on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. And if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, make sure to give a 5-star rating and review. Again, we appreciate that as well. We'll be back later this week with some NBA news and another podcast for you. But again, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time on Courtside. Peace.
Peace.